Welcome to Windows on the World, and tonight we're going to have a bit of a summary and overview of things that we've been talking about over the past several months and years. Sometimes it's good to sit back and contemplate, but actually put information out which is useful in the ongoing search for knowledge. So I hope it's useful and gets the mind going. Yes, the title is Providence versus the Church of Lies. Do you remember that show we did, Progress, a Practical Philosophical Approach? Well, every now and then, it's good to sit back and sort of look at the information and present it in a different way. And as we know, the present time is a pack of lies. And we know that as most who actually value the truth will know that their own greatest asset in this time has to be your own mind. So letting things pollute the mind willingly and with consent is a sign of someone who is basically having a dirty protest in their own bathroom. So first of all, let's take a look what the internet accepted definition of mind actually is. Mind refers to the aspects of intellect and consciousness manifested as combinations of thought, perception, memory, emotion, will and imagination, including all of the brain's conscious and unconscious cognitive processes. Mind is often used to refer especially to the thought processes of reason. Of course, this fragmented definition comes straight out of reason. It comes straight out of the past age of reason, the age of enlightenment, which missed the entire point, in my opinion. Integrated knowledge was taken out of circulation. Unity of knowledge has also been taken out of the picture. Filtering rubbish has also been taken out of circulation. And that has been the theme of quite a few of our recent shows, especially when we're talking about arrested development. And one now has to be a sort of self-employed garbage filterer. Relaxed, of course, but aware and using only the highest intelligence field. And this is actually in reference to our Perfected Mind Field series. There's 3 of them. They're actually on our YouTube channel, they're on our Odyssey channel, and they're in our Spreaker archive. But if you want to find them, there's a playlist that I've put on YouTube for now because we're not getting community strikes on there at the moment. And I'm changing over our provider. I will be going to Podbean by the end of the year. We're currently on Spreaker, which is getting a bit restrictive. We've discussed all that, so let's just give you the titles of these shows. 1 is The Perfected Minefield, 2 is Ritual and Religion, and 3 is called What is Providence. This is a most fascinating subject, and to me the most important subject, because everything else comes from how we use our minds and what we are actually aware of. The most fascinating subject as far as its usefulness goes, in my opinion, and some still have it. It takes a lot to reach a state of perfected mind, however, and it is easily interrupted. Most interactions people choose are in fact interruptions. And once the need for pointless interaction or interruption is removed, things can progress. It is, of course, a long term and it takes a long time to achieve anything that is truly worthwhile. And distraction and emotion are the new mind virus. They are the post-truth mind virus. As we can see everywhere, everything is about triggering emotion and creating distraction. It traps, of course, the weak, and it stifles them through basic, childlike, pound shop psychology. Control. What did people do for thousands of years without psychology and its parasites who create, solve and achieve nothing? Well, they achieve nothing but crowd control, which is of course useful and paramount in the elite serf system. Well, in the past they were governed in ways not dissimilar but seemingly slightly less dishonest. Cunning and the art of war dumbed down is what we of course now have as governance. And the perfected mind has to be the goal. There is nothing else. Everything outside this knowledge is a distraction. Well, this is because nothing can be achieved unless this is known. And there are a few terms which are useful. We have used the term arrested development, for instance, to describe lack of progress, also in focusing on trivial distractions which repeat every day. Every day goes back to square one and the two lies surface once again. If one engages in these distractions, one stays in permanent arrested development. And of course, arrested development doesn't have to be permanent. The two lies system operates to keep one in this state. Of course, religion versus atheism, communism versus capitalism, all the isms are basically a distraction. And of course, then we have the whole creationism versus this intelligent design, which is another lie. Two lies. Well, you get one big lie, split it into two, and get everyone arguing over it forever, which is, of course, what every election is generally about, to keep people away from actually voting for something which is useful. They give them the two lies, right or left, and never a solution, of course. So, yes, everything is framed in this way. Communism versus capitalism. Choose your side. If you argue over the two lies, you are in arrested development. We have mentioned this a lot, of course, and it never sinks in with the masses, though, and it never will. And this is actually a choice. We have to remember that. Everything that is imposed on us is a choice. The present scheme is to keep you in this state. And this is because the lies have to be observed and obeyed. The lies are for a system, both for social and financial control. Many think, of course, that the world is complicated. When one has the right information, it actually appears that this is not true at all. Nothing complicated works efficiently for any length of time. Everything is simple. We have talked about community and communitarian steering on these shows for about 15 years. Those who understand it are less than 1% of the population. I would say much less. Of this 1%, only a few will actually integrate this knowledge into their interactions and use it for a useful purpose, which tells you all you need to know. When the elephant in the room is never addressed and the central point never made, there can of course be no progress, as we can see at the moment. Well, there is and has been no progress. In the UK, for instance, Labour, Tory, Reform, all part of the two lies system, kept all issues of importance out of the public. A two and a bit party system. Media distractions, GB News, BBC, Sky, all part of the same lie, split into two for the sake of pointless and endless argument. And of course the real system is always ignored. How many times can I keep going over this and reiterating it in a simple way? Well, I can keep doing that. But the people who get it, and those who don't get it will at this point never get it. And that is in a way what a lot of the most recent shows have been all about. They've been really for the people who do understand a certain amount and actually want this knowledge and want to expand the knowledge, because that's what these shows are all about. Otherwise, there's no point. Otherwise, it goes back into the media. The mainstream, the fake alternative, or whatever other media you choose is always based around the two lies, and it's never about a solution. And usually, if solutions are presented, they're false solutions. They're solutions which are actually clickbait. They don't really work. And people do seem to enjoy this. It's an endless cycle. It's what they call the samsara wheel. It goes on forever, never gets anywhere. The most informative content, of course, is always ignored. Only clickbait and false argument are available in the mass arena of let's call it accepted non-disclosure. I think that's quite a good way of describing it, actually. The accepted form of non-disclosure, which is the information field which is available to most of the public quite easily. But underneath the surface and with the use of the internet, you can find out anything you want to within several minutes. And this is what I could never really understand, because when I actually did research, everything that I needed to know was within a couple of seconds, or at the most a couple of minutes grasp. There has never been a time when it's been this easy to get the sort of basic information one needs about governance, which also goes into the fact that the internet has been shut down. and we can't find things anymore, and the most useful information is completely marginalized. And for instance, some of the videos which have been the best learning tools for me, from philosophical debate to information which is not in the mainstream, only have, say, 500 to 1,000 views worldwide, which again proves the point that 99% of the population do not want to look beyond the surface distractions that they are given. And there is no way out of that for them. But for people who have this discretion, then the system can be got around, which is really the point of what I'm saying here. But the real system is always ignored, and the majority, of course, argue over acceptable distractions. Those that, let's say, over the last several years used the term waking up were obviously led into saying it as it means the opposite. It means actually staying in one place in arrested development, metaphorically asleep. It is defined as joining a group consensus led by thought leaders who define themselves by their lack of action. That's what this term waking up has come to mean. Or it could be offering tangible and practical solutions to something which is so simple it boggles the mind how much distraction and repetition is generated. But that is not what most actually get into or are indeed looking for. Going absolutely nowhere is the main occupation of most people on a day-to-day basis. The cult leaders chosen to be visible are, of course, the worst. Well, let's just give you three: Russell Brand, Jordan Peterson, David Icke. The grifter media of constant repetition and no content, no useful content, neurosis, self-deception, distraction, dead ends, inaction, apathy. All of this is the purpose of why these things appear in what they call the algorithm. I mean, most people know this, but it's good to reiterate it now and again because we do need a bit of repetition. Clickbait and gossip fill the rest of people's time. Once they have absorbed what they think is useful, which is in effect the two lies, then they then go and have a look at the clickbait, which is even worse. And if one avoids the necessary whilst not challenging this avalanche of BS, there is a void when confronting the basic reality of what is actually called day-to-day life. All knowledge must be integrated into useful action, and philosophical wisdom, of course, is a byproduct of this learning project. And that is where the real gold nuggets are found. Putting things together, I love this sort of information where you are joining dots. It's a very simple form of being a detective. There is nothing really to it because the dots are all there if you want to join them. And those people who put out information and say they're joining dots but then lead everyone back into the two lies are the majority. Well, of course, integrated knowledge into useful action and philosophical wisdom is this learning project, and this cannot and will not happen when minds are infiltrated by even some misinformation. If that filter has not been carefully cultivated and nurtured, there is no future and no knowledge base. Only the useful idiots are promoted, of course. The real info has to be searched for, and there is no excuse, as one doesn't have to search very far to find it. Just to reiterate what I've been saying for the last couple of minutes. This system, which controls seemingly but not completely all participation through consensus, or everyone appears to have agreed when they haven't, is the main steering mechanism today. 97% of scientists agree. Our survey suggests the community voted for this. The NGOs who push the lie fill in these surveys. The public do not. The public are pushed into apathy. And this is why, again, that the majority will never get or understand the simple system which they're operating in. But that doesn't mean that you don't understand it. It means that if you want this information, it is indeed out there. And that's what all the shows we've been doing over the past 10 years have been about, really. They're full of information. So all lies, with the exception of maybe half of 1%, when real indignation actually manages to filter through, is all that is allowed in this consensus reality of governance. So the consensus reality is the reality chosen by at least 98%. They did indeed consent to it. The 98% chose the big lie, and the big lie was split into two. This is the genesis of the story of governance. The majority then argue over these distractions. Now, what prompted me to write some of this stuff today was a headline from the Church of England. And we're going to get into that next. As the church in the UK and elsewhere is starting to be known as community, the only church you have is, of course, your own mind and your own conscious awareness. All public-facing promoted religious figures are liars. They have them in every religion. A good example is the Church of England, which is part of the Universal Church, of course, part of the corporation. The greatest example, I think, is the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, who is a repeater of lies, and unlike Thomas Cranmer, will never burn at the stake. But he is indeed a stake holder. Being a spineless gatekeeper for the financial world or global parasite is his main objective. And he recently stated, did Justin Welby, God is green and denying climate change is anti-Christian. What he means is denying a new parasitic elite serf system is bad for business. Welby has obviously denied the facts and not done any thinking or used his brain whatsoever, or he is just a spineless parasite. I have observed this fine example of treachery over the years, and he is everything that is wrong, as in having no integrity and repeating lies. Is he compromised? Well, quite probably, but the details are irrelevant and who actually cares? In a virtue signalling and morally bankrupt rant, the Church of England quote the following. Lies. The destruction of our planet and God's creation is nothing new. Right at the very beginning of the Bible, the story of the Garden of Eden and of Adam and Eve speaks profoundly about the consequences of pride, self-sufficiency and rebellion against God. Well, here we have the subverting of an existing narrative to further an agenda based on lies, which of course is evil by definition. Interesting also is the use of the term self-sufficiency. The whole aim of the fake green church is to make all subservient to the global parasite system. So what is wrong with self-sufficiency? They are subverting language and perverting the meanings of their own holy book. Well, of course, this is anti-Christian in every respect. So in their eyes, anyone self-sufficient is bad for business, not part of the global community of corporate parasites, a subservient serf to technocracy. And this, of course, includes anyone who grows their own food, exists under God and not corporations, or who connects with divine intelligence. Well, yes, these are the enemy. Well, that's useful to know, isn't it? It says Eden is painted as a place of justice, of equality, of walking closely with God, and where work was a gift rather than a curse. By justice and equality here, do they mean social justice and the inclusivity agenda? You see, nothing that these parasites say is real, spontaneous, or meaningful. It is all propaganda. So, by definition, the Garden of Eden is the opposite of what these liars are talking about. I would say that the work these liars are engaged in is and should be seen as a curse. They have cursed themselves, but more importantly, want everyone else to be cursed through their own consent. So, let's see what else they say. The Garden of Eden was a place of harmony with nature, and yet humans, tasked with the responsibility of stewarding it, cut themselves off from the blessings the creation is designed to offer. Well, who they're talking about here is the global elite parasites. They're talking about the technocrats. They're talking about what comes through the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and its host of agencies. And it's a flat out lie, of course. And only robber barons and their feudalism and modern techno-feudalism through UN Agenda 2030, of course, and its corporate theft, cut off the people from the source. The land was considered, of course, in not so ancient times, to be under God's providence, not under corporate control and under degradation of its true purpose like it is now. Temporary stewardship of land is something the materialist global parasites do not recognise, and this will of course eventually be their downfall. If we go back to agrarian cultures that existed in Northern Europe and the advanced cultures of Sumeria or even Ebla in modern-day Syria, and also throughout Europe under the banner of the Celts, stewardship of the earth was actually taken very seriously. The earth was to be used only temporarily. They knew ownership of it was, of course, nonsensical, as when one dies, another inherits the duty of stewardship of the land. So farming and stewardship of the land was taken very seriously. You had usufruct of the land, which means you had an interest in it, and the land belonged to God. You were looking after it, so therefore would be judged on your ability to look after it and keep it fertile. The regulations of land use and the acts of feudal slavery of the recent past have given way to the not-so-hidden hand of the corporate government of land piracy, which now is taking over the world and all its assets. Now it belongs to parasite corporations who poison it in the name of profit. Global parasites, well, because they exist to take over land for profit and control of all population and nothing else. Therefore, the Universal Church, which includes the Church of England, fully support the demiurge, the archons, the self-appointed robber barons of globalism. So Welby and the anti-divine parasite Church of England are gaslighting their diminishing congregation. Something only Satan and the hierarchy of demons would ever participate in. That is quite a good example, I think, as it goes to the root of what many state that they believe. They even pray on behalf of these anti-divine creatures. Of course, the front puppet parasites cover every religion. This is the very essence of one world governance. They exist as global leaders representing all religions. Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam and the rest all have representative fools trained to spout lies and get well paid for spreading the propaganda which is necessary to bring everyone together under the banner of feudal technocracy. When we hear the fake clergy talking of Judeo-Christian values, we know they are spouting meaningless groupthink. Well, at least those that know these simple wordplay distractions can recognise them, which is, of course, you, the listener. The promoted public-facing and the things that are promoted in the public, the public-facing clowns, repeat the same thing over and over again, keeping the argument firmly focused, of course, on the two lies. These people, of course, are always mediocre, shallow and replaceable. Again, a bit like Justin Welby. Spineless. Nothing of quality can exist in the parasite system. The control system of AI and technocracy is, of course, doomed to fail. Those compliant to it should be of no consequence to what one actually does. For instance, the true thinkers and creators will always be uncontrollable and uncontrolled. And if unnatural control is exerted over a long-term project, it will fail. Thinking people, of course, will slowly cut themselves off from it, which is again where the gatekeepers come in. So if you're following any of these gatekeepers who have millions of views, who are telling you to prep for things and all the rest of the crap that they come up with in their repetitive and tedious videos, then you are being led into the wilderness of the mind project, going nowhere. So all this is about social responsibility, taking responsibility for yourself. So in the modern times, they call this control system participatory democracy. It is control, though, and through useful idiots who infiltrate all public-facing engagement. And we've covered that for so many years. It's good actually to go over this and think of it again, because it really does help to keep things in perspective, I find. I'll be back in a couple of minutes.
I suggest, therefore, that this be sold not through a democratic process. That would take too long and devour far too much of the funds to educate the cannon fodder, unfortunately, which populates the earth. We have to take almost an elitist program that we can see beyond our swollen bellies and look to the future in time frames and in results which are not easily understood or which can be, with intellectual honesty, be reduced down to some kind of simplistic definition.
Golden oldie there, David Lang, from the conference in 1992, the conferences that led up to Rio, the Earth Summit, where the new global technocracy, based on the lie of AGW, I think you should know what that is by now, as promoted by the IPCC and the UN, was actually formulated, the new financial system of looting under the guise of fake environmentalism. And what he was talking about there was a thing called sustainable development. And going over this stuff and expanding on it is obviously essential to keep it in our minds. But I was just thinking and talking to someone the other day about the COVID agenda. It was a challenge, that was, and it was a useful tool for those who were self-educating. It was actually very useful. It showed incompetence. And where there is incompetence, there is inevitably system failure. Something worth thinking about that if people hadn't thought about it in that way, because obviously it was hugely inconvenient. But when you look at these things practically, they are not very well rolled out. In fact, nothing that the parasites do is actually very good. And that, of course, is where they're going to fail. It's only audacity which actually makes this stuff stick. One only has to look at the biorobots who front the operation. No thinking person would ever take them seriously, of course. There is dogma, of course, out there, and there is truth. And they can be synonymous or they can be opposite. The dogma repeated by the majority is only propaganda for a big plan, of course. And the gullible will continue falling for everything and realising nothing as far as how they are governed. But let's get on to another tool now. Humour is essential for survival. Those without a sense of humour are ripe for bio-robotisation. It is a sign of intelligence, of course, and always has been. When the Marxist communitarians tried to destroy humour in the 1980s, there were people who were called comedians who weren't funny. Do you remember that? I worked with one, and their lack of joy and inability to let go and enjoy life itself was restricted by this self-conscious compliance to the mind virus, which they had actually inflicted on themselves. In other words, at one time, they probably would have laughed at things that were generally and obviously funny. So that was a real-life tragicomedy, and it's carried on ever since, really. I mean, you can't get any more restricted than it is now. Of course, the idea of mainstream comedy has completely died. I think comedy is going to become an underground activity. It's going to be something for people who still have real intelligence, and it will be an underground activity. I don't think that you can state that there is real comedy anymore or real humour. It's gone post-humour, post-truth, and bio-robotisation will work on quite a lot of people because they will comply with it. But for those that don't, there are, of course, choices. And that's what this show's really about, I suppose. But the compliance of these Muppets means they are now still hating the Tories, of course, committed to reducing their carbon footprint for the fraudulent financial scam of sustainability for the World Bank and City of London. But of course, they're still anti-capitalist. Those are the people I'm talking about. You know, the crowd that were, in a way, the new Blairites and the communitarians of later times. So that was before the 90s, before the 2000s. And of course, by 2010, we had the big society. And now it's pretty much a done deal. The bio-robots are all in place. The stakeholders are out there. So they were being steered by a fake, artificially constructed set of rules, which were the cover story. So they never understood the real goals of their own captors. They still don't. And they will carry on believing, because it is very difficult to break out of these repetitive patterns. So this was and is their destiny. And it is not mine, and it is not yours if you're listening to this. So let's now get on to something a bit lighter. There are always comedic elements to the gaslighting of the gullible. Laughter is healthy and preserves the ability to see the truth, of course, and it opens up the brain to its best potential. This is why those who are used by the system are joyless, mindless, and, of course, humourless. Let's have a look at a recent headline, which is incredibly funny. London's first ever carbon negative pub opens its doors, featuring electricity converting floor tiles and guilt-free pints. Now, only people who live in certain parts of London would actually show their faces at such a place. And of course, those are who it is aimed for, because in the cities of the future, people will believe that they're saving the environment, when of course they're just making fools of themselves. And they're just being entertaining cannon fodder for, of course, the global parasites. It says in this article, whether it's cycling to work in the rain or sorting through piles of recycling, doing your bit for the planet isn't always much fun. But now it's about to become much more enjoyable, especially if you're a fan of a pint or two. London's first ever carbon negative pub, the 55 tons, will open its doors on Monday to offer guilt-free pints to eco-friendly punters. Here we have the new form of benefice based on lies, but now you can be guilt-free. The only ones who should feel guilty, of course, are those who are profiting from the big lie. It says rather than pulling up a bar stool, drinkers will be able to sit on power bikes which generate electricity when pedalled. Imagine what these idiots are going to look like in their pointless and vacuous virtue signalling. I mean, it appeals to the communitarian trivial minds whose only joy is in being seen making fools of themselves, but to them, they're virtue signalling to the other idiots around them. Well, of course, it's only funny to those who actually get the joke. The joke is on you, so make the most of it. And it says in this article, the band Coldplay used a similar system during their 2022 tour by installing rows of stationary bikes, which helped power aspects of the show. Pedaling a bike at a reasonable pace can produce between 100 and 200 watts of power, just about enough to keep a light bulb on. An Uber UK spokesman, they're actually sponsoring this garbage, told Mail Online that while the company wasn't able to change the pub over to bike power, so in other words, they're pedalling for no reason whatsoever. So you go into a pub and you sat on these bikes talking crap to each other as though they're in the gym. I mean, this is the wilderness of the mind, magnified to the point of pure surreality. It says people will be able to use the bikes to charge their phones and laptops. So that's the result of it all. This is gaslighting 101. It's pure comedy for those who get it, of course. And this is what the gullible will have thrust on them. Entertainment for the global parasites who are looting the world's resources and closing off land and commodities under their fake green population control and reduction scam. And of course, population is falling globally. So that excuse is going to dry up, so they will focus on limits to growth and the overuse of resources, which they control. And they want to ration. Rationing, of course, just makes things more expensive. Artificial scarcity, that's what this is all about. Of course, they have captured and will regulate through artificial scarcity whilst polluting and depriving the population of their inalienable rights. This goes back to the church again, of course, and their participation in the biggest scam of all time. So they've put a lien on everything. And these are meant to be inalienable rights. You are meant to have the rights of property and the rights of usage of land. Well, getting back to brain death, it says in this article the 55 tons will also showcase innovative technologies which convert footsteps into renewable power. Well, we have to remember that despite the lies about renewables, the gas and diesel generators buried all over the UK back up the national grid, but community participation in pointless activities like this is useful to literally keep the dupes in the dark. Which, of course, was the plan. Power cuts, rationing of everything, climate lockdowns for control and management of the cattle. That is, of course, how they see it. Real climate catastrophes are, of course, never talked about, as they would make the population feel less apathetic, which is, of course, no good. They might make people want to live in the moment and stop virtue signalling about nothing. And we're getting on to another article here, just to finish the show off, which is quite humorous too and ties into the previous article. Dolmens located all over Europe and beyond were most likely shelters. Otherwise, their locations and use make no sense. So let's get into this story. Dolmens, of course, are these usually stones. They have a huge heavy capstone with supporting stones, usually 3 supporting stones on a lot of the dolmens, but some of them have more. And we're going to talk about one that has more. It's called Arthur's Stone, a 5,700, it says here, year-old monument in England linked to the legend of King Arthur. It's linked to the legend of King Arthur because they made it up. It says the large stone table is considered one of the most recognisable Neolithic monuments in England. Considered one of the most famous Neolithic monuments, this table-shaped dolmen consists of 9 upright large stones that are topped by one massive capstone weighing approximately 28 tons. As early as the 13th century, people have linked the tomb, and it's not a tomb, so there you go. This is all part of it. So when we're talking about history, which we have been a lot, and we've talked about catastrophism and how previous civilizations were wiped out, these things weren't tombs. They were there for certain people to shelter in. So it says people have linked the tomb to the mythical King Arthur. So they've basically got 2 lies going here. It's not a tomb and it has nothing to do with King Arthur. It says here, the ruler of the fictitious kingdom of Camelot. According to legend, King Arthur battled a giant in a duel at the site. As the giant fell to its death, it left behind imprints of its elbows in the side of one of the stones. Well, of course there were giants in days of old, but this is fantasy, and it covers up the real use as shelters. And who would hoik a 28-ton stone as a roof and cover the structure in earth and then call it a burial chamber? What would be the point of that? And we have these, of course, as far afield as Malta, these dolmens, and we're talking about people who were preparing for an incoming cataclysm. So what are people preparing themselves for now? Nothing. They are preparing themselves for another day of gaslighting, another day of repeating the two lies, another day of arguing over trivialities, and another day of holding themselves back from knowledge which is actually available to them. Can you see what I'm getting at with this? And of course, yes, this constant reiteration of history as a misrepresentation. And when we look at things practically, they always make sense. The simplest explanation is usually the most reliable. And of course, when they talk about burial chambers in these things, skeletons were found in them, as they may have later been used to put bones in, but they weren't originally burial chambers. And it says here, another tale says that marks on the stone were made when Arthur knelt down to pray. The monument also supposedly marks the burial place of Arthur. No, it doesn't. More recently, archaeologists have discovered that the 5,000-year-old tomb was part of a vast ceremonial landscape that fed into the halls of the dead, which were large wooden buildings that were deliberately burned to the ground and replaced by 3 nearby earthen burial mounds, according to the University of Manchester. Well, here again, they're linking something that has nothing to do with burial chambers to burial chambers. And this is the way that academia works. It works by perpetuating a lie and then finding more links and supposedly more proof to back up the lie. It says both Arthur's Stone and the Halls of the Dead could have been used as location for ancient rituals. Well, anywhere can be used as a location, and probably was a location at some point for an ancient ritual. Well, all this distraction over a simple shelter which was made because of real climate change. That's the irony of it all, really. That's why I'm finishing the show with this. And this is the most sensible explanation as to why anyone would drag such ridiculously heavy weights to these places. After all, burial places are everywhere. Why use this as a grave? No mention of all this, though, as fairy tales do not have to be proved, a little bit like anthropogenic global warming. As for King Arthur, nice concept, but practical knowledge will always usurp distraction stories, and the real essence of truth and justice should always flow unimpeded. And remembering that the real magic is not in fairy tales and legend, it is in the perfected mind. This is what all these legends, including King Arthur and the knights, are and always were about. Philosophical knowledge. So in other words, people are getting distracted again. And all of these articles I see, a lot of the stuff I get sent, it's all distraction. It's all fakery. So we are in the post-truth world. And in times of mind virus, the simple truth and connection to the real is essential. So just forget what the rest are doing. This is what I found really helpful. The two lies, of course, will go on forever. The real climate crisis will be swift and decisive. It will not be 100 years into the future and based on no science, no facts, and a pack of lies from lobbyist corporates who have no credibility whatsoever. None of it will be credible, and the public are responsible for all the lies that they facilitate. So we are responsible for everything that goes into our minds, and it is up to us to perfect what we have been given by God. Well, hope you enjoyed that. Hope it was useful. Hopefully it was practical, down-to-earth advice and not too complicated. Remember, everything has to be simple. Do support the show if you can. info@windowsontheworld.net. You can support us on the homepage. I will continue to do this. Got so much more information I want to put out. Took a bit of a rain check and a bit of a contemplation this week. Hope you enjoyed it. See you on the next show.